So for me, when I get that question, what's the difference between coaching and therapy? Uh, I actually don't know. So I started to ask other people those questions too. And I remember asking Chris Iverson this question. So, Chris, how do you answer this when people say, what's the difference between coaching and therapy? And it was very simple. Chris said, the difference is there's one question that we ask more in a therapy. And I said, what is that? And he said, well, in therapy, we say, what do you want instead? Because I think the notion is in therapy, there is still a little bit of problem talk that clients might bring. Then all you need to do is, so what is it that you want instead? And then it turns into something that's very similar to coaching conversation. I love that distinction. You know, I think even when I first met Solution Focused, it was rather different than other methods of working. And it was a little bit, you can actually tell Solution Focused from other ways of working because you can see some things that it's uniquely Solution Focused in it. But it's funny because these days I go to conferences and different things and people call it something else, but what I hear is Solution Focused in it. So I'm thinking, well, you're talking about solution focus, but how could you call it this? And I was actually slightly offended because I feel like you stole it and you call it something else. But then I realized that that is such a great compliment for us because we've done, we as in solution focused practitioners, all in the world, we've done such a great job that is spreading. So I find it a little bit difficult these days to sort of, okay, what is solution focused and what is not? I find it a little bit hazy these days, which is a good sign. I think one of the things that I remember from actually yesterday, one of the students, I was so impressed by her. I wish I took her name. She came up to me after class and she said, hey, son, I think something is clear to me. And I said, yeah, what is clear to you? And she says, I actually thought solution focused was finding solutions within the client. She says, but I now realize that it's not about finding solutions, but it's actually building solutions in between. And I just thought it was so insightful. So one of the things that I notice is that what is solution focused not is it's not problem solving. So it's not a problem solving model where you come discuss something and boil it down to an option and kill the other options and decide on something, or and figuring out the next steps towards where you want to go. Well, that's not really solution focused. And also what I find is a lot of times people believe that clients have all the answers, which is a very noble belief. Don't get me wrong. And I think if that's what you believe, that clients have all the answers, then probably you're going to end up just asking questions because you're trying to find that out and then take it out of the person. And I think that is one confusion people sometimes have. The way that I understand solution focused is I actually do not believe that the client has all the solutions or all the answers. I mean, otherwise, why are they there? I think what happens is in solution focused practice, and the name is misleading, is we do this process of solution building. So it's a confluence. I influence you and you influence me, and that's how we build the dialogue so that the meaning of what you thought you wanted is getting clearer because of our dialogue. So I guess to me, what is not solution focused, I don't know how to answer that, but I think what is solution focused is getting clear to me that is the confluence between the practitioner and the client. I think the effectiveness of you as a teacher is not necessarily what you do in class, but the effectiveness of a teacher is shown by what your students do after the class. So how would I know that is one of the things that I used to do is I used to sort of see teaching as my performance. But I think what really needs to shift here is what's the practicality of what they get out of this class so that their practice outside of class is changing. And the best way to find out about that was how do we teach our students to be an observer of their own work. And when I actually met microanalysis, and it's such a beautiful way of looking at your own conversation and being an observer of your own conversation. And microanalysis is sort of, it's a tool. It's showing you the tool to see how co-construction happens in a dialogue. So for example, Peter de Jong talks about listen, select, and build process. And how do we teach that? We can explain all we want. When you listen for these things. How do you select? You select. You can do that. But how do we know the students know how to do that when you are not there? So we introduced this microanalysis idea. So people will practice in class. They will go home and they will transcribe it. They will bring it to us. And then we do a supervision process. So each class is different, but what I found most effective is when people bring their own work and transcribe and microanalyze their work. I can just, and it's not like 30-minute session that they're doing it, maybe just beginning 3 minutes of your session. When you're observing your own work and looking at your own assumptions, because it shows so much. So your assumptions are there, and also how you're building on what your client said. It will show you what you're choosing to respond with, which shows a lot about your stance. I found that to be the most useful way of teaching. Actually, not teaching, but most useful way for them to learn. That's what I found. And I am I'm still learning about microanalysis because there's so much to learn. But Harry Corman, Janet Bavelis, and Peter de Jong, Sarah Smock, I mean, they have this website, microanalysis.ca, and generous team, they put all their articles there so people who are interested, they can read. So I'm still wondering how we can incorporate microanalysis much earlier in the program so that people really get used to seeing their own work. Yeah, I found that to be the most effective way. I think about 10 years ago, even about 5 years ago, when we have trainings, public trainings, just open to anyone to sign up, I actually had some of my students, they came from social work and therapy world, and they will attend coaching because they want to sort of shift their practice to coaching. But about 5 years ago, I rarely get any students from social work or practitioner part of the world. But I get a lot of managers and leaders and like CEOs. They come to take courses, especially communication, HR, they're coming. And I was really intrigued by it. It's like, how come you're coming to take these courses? And about 2 years ago, I just got to have a conversation with someone who was high up in the communication in the government. And I said, how come you're coming to take these classes? And she said, well, because I want to do something about the workplace dialogues that happen. And I said, tell me more about it. And she said, well, you see a lot of leaders at workplaces and they say one thing, oh, collaboration is important. But if you look at their language patterns or dialogues during team meetings, it's a complete opposite of what they say they believe in. So she came to take my class because she wanted to change the patterns of dialogues at workplaces. And that really inspired me because that is also very congruent with what I want. The reason why I am continuing solution-focused practice is because I want to see dialogues change at home between parents and children, among siblings, between couples. I want to see different dialogues happen at schools, like what you do. And also I want to see different dialogues at workplace. Because workplace is where people spend so much time. And if we can impact the workplace dialogues, I think we can really change the world, as you say. And I don't want to talk about, when you do solution focus, here's an outcome. Here's more profit. It's not about that. It's not about profit. It's about people who come to work. And if we can change dialogues between people at workplaces, I think they really will find that joy of work and the meaning of why they're there and the purpose of the meaning of their work. I think it will be meaningful work. So the people are just naturally motivated. We don't have to motivate them. Because it's interesting because some leaders I interview, why do you learn coaching? Some people say, well, I want to have a difficult conversation, but I want to use coaching approach. Well, that's not really coaching. That's actually, you're trying to mask it with coaching. It's called supervision. Some people say, oh, I want to give them direction. And I would say, you have clear agenda? Yeah, I do, but I want to say it in a coaching way. That's not really coaching. It's called directing. So without being confused by other things that people are trying to mask. When we are talking about coaching in workplaces, I think we're really talking about changing the dialogues and how people address each other. And I think that really makes a big difference. Maybe I should write a book about it because I've made enough mistakes. And when I first learned about solution focused, the way that I learn is I need to teach. So I started teaching relatively right away. And that was attracting many people, which is good. But soon enough, I realized after a few years of actually learning solution focused a little bit better, I realized I was doing it all wrong. So every 3-4 years, I sort of hold this class called apology class. And it's re-inviting the past students and pretty much apologizing for what I have done and re-engage into dialogues so that we are all reminding and refreshing ourselves. And it's interesting because when I first started to teach, I think I was teaching solution focus like a formula, like an algorithm. So the way that I did was I would just give them the question cards. It's like, hey, here are the solution focused questions and make it into your habit of mouth so that it comes out, which is useful. And then I realized that people were pretty much memorizing all the questions and kind of sit there with a client and client is talking, but they're rehearsing their next question. Oh dear. So that was one of the first major mistakes that I made. Teaching it as an algorithm. So after realizing it, I thought, okay, so it's not an algorithm. How do I teach it more like a heuristics? So it's not your habit of mouth, but more starting from your habit of mind. So then it will kind of connect naturally. So they will be able to actually listen, select, and build. So that was my lessons. One lesson that I learned. Second thing that I realized was I've seen some other people do it. So it's not just me making the mistake, okay? And what I've also noticed is that some people think a dialogue is a noun, people think. But dialogue is actually a verb. And I think it's the same way the solution-focused dialogue as a practice is also not a set thing. So when we are teaching solution focus, I sometimes get criticized by some traditional solution focus practitioners for changing a few things. For example, I may introduce miracle question, which is a main theme of solution focused. I realized that it wasn't practical for me with my audience, managers, directors, and CEOs. And when I say miracle question, they'll be like, excuse me? And my students who come from that field will be like, I am not sure if I can use that at work. So I realized that it needs to evolve a little bit. So I have been adopting a lot more of tomorrow question by a brief team. And that seems to really go well. And at the same time, I wonder if there are other ways that we can evolve and really accept that evolution. Or not evolution, but more a different elaboration of solution focused with a little bit more open mind. And then the third one that I heard very early on. And one of my teachers taught me this. And he said, well, solution focus is doing whatever works. And he said, so if you think NLP may work, if you think Gestalt might work here, then use them. I completely disagree with that. And I'm glad that I do, because I probably grew from that thinking. I think when we say whatever works, do more of it, I don't think it means do other practices, because solution focus is not an orphan. We don't need extended families to support us. I think to me, it's a whole process. You do not need to go to other things and other tools, because they're all useful, don't get me wrong. But the question that I ask myself is not necessarily is it useful, because all other modalities, they are useful. If it's not useful, people will not buy it, so it will die. But the big question that I ask is it necessary? So if I ask myself, is that necessary? Oftentimes, no. I can get to probably similar place just using simple solution-focused dialogue. Why do I have to bring in another chair, another this, puppet? That's my take on it. So I guess some mistakes I've made, I learned a great deal from making those mistakes. And I will continue to hold my apology classes, because I'm hoping that I will continue to learn and grow.